Can you walk us through what is going on with this? Stop the Steal is the name of the organization, right?
Sure, Matt. I'm happy to. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. Yeah, I think it's vitally important that the grassroots of this country show their outrage at the idea that the votes of the people, the votes of Republican voters and those brave Democrats and independents who crossed over to vote in the Republican primaries are being disallowed, and that the party bosses, the kingmakers, most of whom are lobbyists, as you know, that's the second hat they all wear, are determined to steal this nomination from the people and from Donald Trump. And that has to obviously be fought inside the hall, but it also has to be fought outside the hall. Mm-hmm. So I am urging Trump supporters and those who are in favor of a nationalist agenda, as opposed to all the other candidates in the Republican Party who are globalists, to come to Cleveland. Take a bus, hitchhike, drive, fly, walk if you have to. We need you in Clinton. We need you in Cleveland. Come to the Forest City. We need an enormous show of strength, and we need to show that we're not going to stand for it. We plan 3 days of rallies and protests to show that the will of the people will not be denied. And we plan a large Stop the Steal rally. Alex Jones is going to speak. I'm going to speak. We've invited Pat Buchanan to speak. We will ultimately invite Congressman Ron Paul to speak because although he may not be a Trump supporter, he's been on the receiving end of these kind of tactics himself 3 years ago. So that is the plan. It's a reverse Saul Alinsky. These are our days of rage. We're not putting up with it.
Now, walk us through what do you mean by steal the election? What are they going to do with the convention? If by all calculations, pretty much Donald Trump is most likely, barring some kind of a catastrophic change of direction here, going to walk into the convention with more delegates and more votes than anybody else. What do you mean? How are they going to steal it? What do you mean by that?
I've written about this extensively for Breitbart. I think I've had 3 major pieces on the mechanics of how you steal this. It's really very simple. There's a dozen different ways you could do it. The steal will not be on the floor. The steal will be in the Rules or the Credentials Committee. Let's recognize that while Trump may have an absolute majority on the question of who should be nominated for president by the time he gets to Cleveland, in other words, 1,237 votes for president, he's not going to have 1,237 votes on procedural questions. A perfect example, the Texas delegation. Trump is entitled to 40 votes on the first ballot, but those 40 people filling those seats will be virulently anti-Trump. They will vote against him on credentials. They will vote against him on rules. So, for example, and this is just an example, the Rules Committee could pass a rule throwing out any delegate who was elected with the help of Democrats. In other words, if Democrats were allowed to vote in the primary, those delegates would be disallowed. That would reject the South Carolina delegation. If the Rules Committee passed that, then that decision goes to the entire convention for ratification. That is where the big steal will take place, because that is where the Trojan horse delegates that have been inserted into these overwhelmingly Trump delegations will vote against us. That's where the big steal will happen. Or, theoretically, you could throw out Trump delegates in credentials, as the Eisenhower people did in 1952. They challenged the seating of the Louisiana and Texas Taft delegates on the slim read that when people showed up at those caucuses back in Louisiana and Texas to vote for Ike, they were turned away. That was their case. And, of course, because they had the votes, the Credentials Committee agreed. That went to the full floor of the convention. The chairman ruled that the Texas and Louisiana delegates could not vote on their own fate, and that broke Taft's back. Eisenhower went on to be nominated. So there's all kinds of games that the establishment and the kingmakers can play. Remember, Ben Ginsburg and the Bush-Romney types are the masters of this kind of deceit, this kind of a bait and switch. They did it to Ron Paul, and they're fixing to do it to Donald Trump, a strategist very, very high up in the Kasich campaign, somebody who I may have been in business with as a partner at one time, actually bragged to a journalist who Matt, just the other night, saying, I think this nomination could be stolen from Trump, and I'm fixing to steal it. So make no bones about it. The lobbyist class, the Washington, D.C., Wall Street combine, they will never acquiesce in the nomination of Trump. Whether he has 1,237 votes or not, they will attempt to hijack this nomination, and only mass demonstrations and adept maneuvering inside the hall are going to prevent this.
Now, Roger, you mentioned the 1952 situation there, right? Now, I read your GQ interview. Is it possible that Trump, if he gets organized on this, and he has been behind the ball, there's no doubt about it, but I think that they're starting to recognize that they have to get organized on this. They hired Paul Manafort, obviously, who I think was a very smart hire by the Trump campaign. In addition to that, they're starting to make moves on the right direction here, at least a little bit. We'll see how that starts to materialize in the coming weeks here. But is it possible that those same rules, the Trump people could use those same rules against the other guys, against the efforts to steal?
They certainly could, Matt, but that requires them to have a majority on the Rules or the Credentials Committee or a working majority on the floor. And that is yet to be known until we know the outcome of the rest of the primaries. And the rest of the caucuses, and the rest of the state conventions, and the rest of the state committee meetings. We don't have a hard count. We really don't know where this contest is. Now, the Trump campaign has been brilliant by pursuing a communications-based strategy. I give credit to Donald Trump for this. This is his vision, his strategy. It is a strategy that put an emphasis on these huge rallies with mass media coverage, collecting the data from those who attended the rallies, also put a premium on his debate performances and doing as many interviews as humanly possible. This is a campaign that proceeded without polling, without targeting, without analytics, without much of a ground organization, without TV commercials at reasonable levels, without radio commercials, without voter mailing, and with a minimum of phone calling. It was a totally communication-based strategy, and it has been brilliant, and it has worked. But now you're in a different phase of the campaign. Where there's a premium on organization and experience and knowledge of the rules. So the great asset of the Trump people in the States is enthusiasm and numbers. The great drawback is their lack of experience. This is now where the party Sharpies take you to the cleaners because they know the rules and you don't. So the campaign is retooling quickly to fix this problem. They have brought on Paul Manafort to deal specifically with this. They still have to get out of Wisconsin with their skin. The Wisconsin Walker-Ryan machine is notorious for vote stealing. I would urge you to look at the monograph by Richard Charnin, the mathematician who has charted their stealing over the years. So I think Trump is in for a rough patch in Wisconsin. It is not that conservative a state. There aren't that many evangelicals. It's overwhelmingly Catholic. It is tough turf for Trump. But if he can get out of Wisconsin with a reasonable number of delegates, then the next focus goes to North Dakota, Colorado, and Wyoming. It is essential that the Trump folks get out of those states with their fair share of delegates in order to stay on track. Now, this presupposes, Matt, they have to win New Jersey. They have to win New York. They have to win Delaware. They have to win Maryland. They probably have to win New Mexico. There's a little fluidity here.
And California, too.
And, of course, the big enchilada, California.
Right. Now, are you encouraged by the steps the Trump campaign has been taking? Are they doing the things that they need to do now, finally, after, seeing significant slip-ups in Louisiana and elsewhere? Are they finally learning their lesson on this front?
Well, it appears that way. I mean, Manafort is a brilliant hire. He is the best convention strategist and organizer in the country, but he's playing catch-up ball. I mean, the campaign is not prepared for this in the late states. I think perhaps there was a supposition that once Trump ran the tables in the primaries and caucuses, that the party opposition to him would collapse. as it did with Reagan. At a certain point, the Republican establishment figured out that Reagan couldn't be stopped, and they dropped back to Plan B, inserting George H.W. Bush on the ticket so he could undo Reaganism as soon as he possibly could. Because George Bush never agreed with Ronald Reagan on any major issue.
No.
He's a globalist. Reagan was a nationalist. So they essentially tried to undo Reaganism from the inside. That isn't going to happen here. In other words, Trump is such anathema to the established order. He is so ready to call foul on all their BS, whether it's 9/11, whether it's the Iraq War, whether it's the Patriot Act, whether it is the bailout for the big banks. He's not going down with their agenda, and they're scared to daylights of it. And then secondarily, because the ringleaders in the party, the Haley Barbers, the Ed Rogers, the Rick Holtz, all these guys wear second hats as lobbyists. They make money by peddling influence. Well, if you have no influence to peddle, it's tough to make a living. Trump is his own man. You can't buy him with campaign contributions. You can't bully him. He would march to his own drummer. And believe me, this scares the Washington establishment to death.
Now, is there a point here where, if we do walk into a contested convention, we've obviously seen comments from Governor Walker from Wisconsin, who just endorsed Ted Cruz. But right before he did, he came out and said that he thinks if it were a contested convention, that the person who would be the nominee coming out of that would be somebody not running. We've seen Karl Rove call for a quote unquote fresh face, meaning not one of the three candidates running, not Cruz, not Trump, not Kasich. We've seen so many other people warning about this, that if we walk into a contested convention, that walking out of a contested convention would be a nominee who, like a Paul Ryan or something. I mean, is that their plan? Is that what they're after? Is in kind of following up on that too, in the same vein, is voting for Cruz. And I know there's a lot of good grassroots people out there that are supporting Cruz that don't like the Washington establishment, but Cruz can't win the nomination outright before the convention. So is voting for him voting to help the establishment steal this thing at a convention?
Cruz is a convenient tool for the establishment. First of all, let's be very clear. Ted Cruz is not a conservative. He is a globalist. He is a man with Bush lineage. He was George W. Bush's issues man for his entire campaign for president in his first year in the presidency. If you liked spending under Bush, blame Ted. If you liked our bailout of the banks, blame Ted. Ted took a secret sweetheart loan from Goldman Sachs. By the way, that's a crime, and secondarily, he lied about it. So don't buy the narrative. Tricky Ted wants to be Reagan, but he's Nixon. That's his real problem. So, and the establishment types don't like him, not because of his policies, Matt, because of his personality, because of his prickly personality. Now, having worked very hard to collect evidence of voter fraud and irregularities in Oklahoma, Kansas, Utah, Hawaii, and Texas, frankly, they ought to put the handcuffs on him, because the Trump people can go to credentials and challenge the seating of hundreds, literally hundreds, of Ted Cruz's delegates who were fraudulently elected.
Whoa. Hold on. Can you back that? Can you explain that a little bit more? Explain that. That's an explosive charge there, Roger. Can you explain that?
Go to stopthesteal.org.
Mm-hmm.
For over a month, we have had an 800 number up, a toll-free number. We have collected and documented with sworn affidavits thousands of claims of voter irregularities in the states where Ted Cruz has won. And we're prepared to present them to the Credentials Committee. If they want to fight, let's fight. Ted Cruz's delegates in Texas were fraudulently elected. There are thousands of examples of voter fraud. That means people voted for Donald Trump, but their vote was corrected for Ted Cruz. Thou shalt not steal, Ted. You're a big Bible man. Read that one carefully. Thou shalt not steal. This guy that's why I call him Tricky Ted. Very tricky.
All right. Well, Roger Stone, thanks so much for taking the time on Saturday to give us a call. We're going to have lots more details about everything you're talking about here up on Breitbart over the coming later today and over the coming days and weeks. This is going to be a massive narrative moving forward. Thanks for taking the time to give us a call and walk us through all this.
Great to be with you.